on this week in the news. And we begin with news from Egypt. The violence continues to rage in Egypt. Now Coptic Catholic Patriarch Abraham Isaac Cedric is speaking out on behalf of Egyptian Catholics. He says that this is not the beginning of a civil war, but a war against terrorism. The conflict began when the military and police attacked camps housing those protesting the ouster of President Mohamed Morsi. Morsi is supported by the Muslim Brotherhood, which wants Egypt to have an Islamic-inspired government. Patriarch Cedric also thanked Muslims that have stood by Catholics and Christians, protecting their churches and offering them shelter. Marcia Petrosillo is the spokesperson for Aid to the Church in Need. She spoke to Rome Reports about the violence Christians are enduring in Egypt.
Christians have come under fire from Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood since violent clashes between supporters of deposed President Mohamed Morsi and the army broke out. Islamists largely accuse the Christian population in Egypt of backing the coup that removed Morsi as president. They believe that Christians and the Christian churches supported the army in removing President Morsi. There are even some who have spoken about a Christian crusade against Morsi. This is not true because the church has not taken positions. It allowed its members to act freely. About 10% of the population in Egypt is Christian. They have increasingly become a minority under attack from an ongoing struggle. Those attacks have centered on churches, monasteries, schools, and even Christian-owned businesses across Egypt. This image shows how flames engulfed a church in Minya, south of Cairo. We are hearing that during these tragic days, about 50 churches have been torched or attacked, but it's hard in these cases to have exact figures because, unfortunately, there is a lack of information. As time goes by, the situation continues to worsen despite international calls for restraint. However, the persecution of Christians in Egypt is not a new phenomenon. Surely Christians must not be happy about what happened this year under Morsi's presidency. There have been an increase in sectarian violence and attacks against Christians. In the past few days, Pope Francis has also appealed for peace, dialogue, and reconciliation in Egypt.
Tutti insieme, Maria, Regina della Pace, prega per noi.
In news from Rome, Egypt was on Pope Francis's mind during this past Sunday's Angelus at the Vatican. The Pope prayed again for peace in the volatile nation. He also spoke out against all forms of violence. Rome Reports has more from St. Peter's Square.
During Sunday's Angelus at St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis renewed his calls for peace in Egypt, where violent clashes between the army and supporters of deposed President Mohamed Morsi continue to drive up the death toll among its citizens.
Continuiamo anche a pregare per la pace in Egitto. Tutti insieme, Maria, Regina della Pace, prega per noi.
During his Angelus remarks, Pope Francis spoke on the gospel reading for the day, which coincidentally dealt with peace and how violence is incompatible with faith. He said the gospel's message explained that Jesus set the criteria for which to live by peacefully, live for God or live for oneself, to serve or be served. But he added that living in peace does not mean being neutral.
Gesù non porta neutralità. Questa pace non è un compromesso a tutti i costi. Seguire Gesù comporta rinunciare al male, all'egoismo e scegliere il bene, la verità, la giustizia.
However, the Pope went on to condemn all forms of violence, saying that the words of the gospel do not authorize the use of force to spread the faith.
È proprio il contrario. La vera forza del cristiano è la forza della verità e dell'amore, che comporta rinunciare ad ogni violenza. Fede e violenza sono incompatibili. Fede e violenza sono incompatibili. Invece, fede e fortezza vanno insieme. Il cristiano non è violento.
During his remarks, Pope Francis also added that faith is not meant to be a decorative or ornamental item, but that it should be at the center of each person's life.
In news from around the country, half the population of American adults consider abortion morally wrong. This comes from the latest study from the Pew Research Center's Religion and Public Life Project. The study shows that 49% of adults consider it morally wrong to have an abortion, while 22% consider embryonic stem cell research morally wrong, and 12% view in vitro fertilization as morally wrong. In more news from around the country, though local news outlets predicted it to be a failure, the March on Washington attracted 250,000 people fighting for civil rights. This August 28th marks its 50th anniversary. Those who attended the march, made famous by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, hope Americans will take to heart his message of equality. 92-year-old Walter Robinson was there. He says we must still work on coming together to help those in need. Reggie Tobias, who serves as the Assistant Supervisor for Security at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, was 17 when he marched alongside Dr. King. He says that 50 years later, we must continue to live Dr. King's dream. Well, that is all the information we have for you at this time. I'm Kate Andrews. Don't forget, you can keep up to date on Catholic news throughout the week with Catholic Newsbreak right here on the Catholic TV Network.